There is a lot of discussion about the difficulty of Elden Ring and the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC in particular. In my opinion, the difficulty is not the problem. With the right builds and the right tools, even the toughest boss can be easy, even trivial. Just do a quick Google search, and even this early after the DLC's release, you can readily find a number of ways to cheese any boss. No, the problem is not primarily one of difficulty, but of playstyle. That is to say, the difficulty is only a problem for those who like to play Souls games a certain way. There have always been multiple ways to play and enjoy Souls games. However, for the purpose of this discussion, I'm going to draw a distinction between those who chose to engage in every aspect of the game and those who only engaged in some aspects. I happen to fall into the latter category. I couldn't care less about min-maxing my build or testing out different combinations of weapons and strategies to take on bosses. For me, the enjoyment came from immersing myself in the world as the character I embodied, janky as it may be. As you progressed in the game, you became better at playing the game and better at playing your character, to the point where you could face even the hardest boss with a fairly good chance of defeating it within a couple of tries, simply because you had become so skillful with your character. Elden Ring, especially the later sections of the game and the DLC, does not encourage this style of play. Nothing illustrates this better than the boss fights. In past Souls games, the boss fights were the absolute highlight. For the most part, bosses felt fair, and when you died, you felt it was your fault, with some notable exceptions. I'm looking at you, Vicar Lawrence. Many of Elden Ring's bosses don't feel fair at all. They seem designed purely to deceive the player, especially Souls veterans, to the point where you can literally not trust your eyes to tell you how to respond to an attack, because the visuals are meant to mislead you into rolling too early or thinking you have a gap for attacking when there is none. Furthermore, the timing of the dodges is extremely tight, and a single misstep will almost certainly result in you getting caught in a multi-hit combo that will probably kill you outright. The bosses feel gamified to the point where it completely breaks immersion, and no matter how skillful you have become with your character, every boss will make you feel like a complete noob. The only way to beat these bosses, since you cannot react to them, is either to trivialize them using some kind of strategy or to memorize their movesets and the appropriate responses. Sure, by optimizing your build and using Spirit Ashes, you can get past the bosses fairly quickly. However, optimizing your build forces players to engage with aspects of the game they may not enjoy, a bit like requiring players to engage in fishing games in JRPGs. And using Spirit Ashes makes the victory feel hollow, since very little actual skill is often required. On the other hand, learning the movesets can be extremely tedious for veteran Souls players and is a completely different experience from facing previous Souls bosses, almost as if it is an entirely different genre, more like a bullet hell game than a fighting game. Speaking for myself, when having to repeat the same fight over and over and over again, I get bored long before I get good. In conclusion, this leaves players like me between a rock and a hard place. We long for the rush we experienced when facing previous Souls bosses man-to-man, or man-to-beast as the case may be, but there is no way we can get the same experience in Elden Ring unless you have an extremely high tolerance for frustration. To be sure, the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC is some of From Software's best work in many respects, especially when it comes to visuals, exploration, and build variety. Sadly, due mainly to the boss design, many Souls veterans will find it to be either too tedious if you play it one way or too hollow if you play it another.